You are Locked On Pistons Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Detroit on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And here we go. It's alive. Locked On Pistons Postcast. Welcome one, welcome all. I'm your host, Jake Reitman. You can follow me on Twitter at Jake_Reitman. This is a live Locked On Pistons Postcast after a disappointing loss to the Chicago Bulls, 122-112. Pistons fall to 7-9 on the season, 3-5 at home. And this one, it's the slow start that really cost the Pistons. We'll break that down. And all game, a common theme, the subpar defense, and in particular from this Pistons team at the 4 and 5 positions, the bigs, whatever you want to call it, the inability to close out on the shooters. Chicago just having their way, and we'll wrap it up with studs and duds. That's all coming up next on a live Locked On Pistons Postcast. And as always, we thank you for making this your post-game destination. It's real simple. Locked On Sports Detroit on YouTube has you covered with post-game instant reaction shows for Pistons, Lions, Tigers, and the Michigan Wolverines football team. It's all part of Locked On Sports Detroit, just an extension of all of our wonderful Locked On brands. So shout out to Koo on the Locked On Pistons daily podcast. What a tremendous job he does. And I'm fired up to take care of the post-game reaction show. So there you have it. It's as simple as that. Now, that being said, a great time to remind you as well that your favorite podcast now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Pistons daily newsletter. It's your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pistons newsletter. And hey, how about a huge shout out for today's presenting sponsor? That's right. The Locked On Pistons Postcast is brought to you by FanDuel, and it's that time of year. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. If you were with us for the little pre-run, some technical difficulties, here we are. My apologies for that. So if you're rejoining this stream, we appreciate that. But sometimes you got to roll with the punches. You start it back up, and here we are. So back with you for a second live Locked On Pistons postcast. But that first one, it's just the dress rehearsal, put it that way. But 122-112, the final in this one. The slow start is what costs the Detroit Pistons in this one. And it was a hole they really could never crawl out of because of the inability to defend. Now, more on that in our second segment. We're going to talk about where those matchup shortcomings, failures, whatever you want to call it, really exploited the Pistons and how the Bulls were able to really victimized the Pistons, especially from the long line. But the disappointing part about this one, where the Detroit Pistons were, and I know it's the second night of a back-to-back, but it was the second night of a back-to-back for the Bulls as well, who are coming off embarrassing losses to the tune of a 143-107 defeat to the Rockets and 144-126 defeat to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So it's not like this Bulls team was just, on this some crazy high and coming in and playing great basketball. No, the Pistons allowed them to get there. They allowed them to make all the three-pointers that they did tonight, just a crazy amount, 23 of 46 from the long line, 50% from three-point line, from the three-point line. And it was Vucevic that got started early and often, and that put this team in a rhythm. It gave the rest of the team confidence, and they just never looked back. And the Pistons aren't a type of team from an identity standpoint that are going to outscore you. So when they're giving up 122 points, they're just not good enough offensively. And Greg Kessler said this on the broadcast, to be able to get into these types of track meet games, and it has to start with the defense. And unfortunately, both Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren, from an interior defense and stepping out and closing out on the Bulls shooters, the three-point shooters, just were unable to do that throughout a way too large portion of this game. And that's why you see the Pistons give up the 122 points, and they're not going to win a lot of games when that is the case. But appreciate everybody tuning in. It was a tribute night where the Pistons played paid homage to the bad boys, the bad to the bone jerseys. You see it over there. I've got my Detroit Bad Boys shirt up in the background. Of course, my grandmother, Mary Jo Isaacson, making that happen for me, which I do appreciate, but it's a good addition to the home studio there. And I love the uniforms, love the court. I was the one complaining about the Pistons NBA Cup court and the electric blue and how hard that was to watch and how hard it was to see that bright blue on the court. I liked this court much, much better. And the black and orange is a nice little change up, and again, a way to honor the Detroit Pistons, bad boys, bad to the bones, and so on and so forth. They just didn't play like it tonight. And I know they try to mix up some scuffles here and there, and it's like what we talked about the last time. And it's not tough guy stuff. It's not some culture or any other buzzword people like to throw around. It's BS. It's loser crap. And unfortunately, you just keep seeing that from this Pistons team. I know it's one loss. I'm trying not to get so upset over just one loss. They can bounce back on Thursday against the Hornets, but I didn't see the Pistons doing enough to make winning plays. And on the contrary, the Bulls, all of a sudden, you allow them to play with that type of confidence. You allow Zach LaVine to get hot in the fourth quarter. I mean, he finishes with 25 points for LaVine, 25 points for Kobe White, and 29 for Vucevic. So between those three players, that's 79 points and no other Bull was in. I'm sorry. I guess Josh Giddey had 11 points, but other than that, no other Bull was in double figures. And so those were the three that beat this Pistons team. And it was a lack of defense and a slow start, all culminating in a 122-112 win over the Detroit Pistons. Now, that being said, I do think JB Bickerstaff tried a couple of different things rotationally and tried switching off every screen because the Pistons defense on some of those pick and rolls were just so bad. Duren's not getting out to shooters, not athletic enough to step away from the basket and guard guys beyond the 3-point line. And the same with Isaiah Stewart. And when your Pistons bigs are that bad defensively, there's not a whole heck of a lot that JB Bickerstaff can do in terms of, a strategic approach defensively. And I saw some conversation on Twitter. Oh, this is disappointing. This one's on JB Bickerstaff. I don't think that's the case, because no matter what the Pistons were doing tonight, the shortcomings of defense were a matter of the inability to guard, and players got to make plays. And Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren, not to put this entire game on just two guys, but those were two guys that allowed the opposition to really have a field day. And sometimes your opponent is hot, and sometimes your opponent's going to chuck up 23 or, make 23 out of 46 3-pointers and shoot 56% from the long line like we saw tonight. So all in all, frustrating night, disappointing night, and a chance to bounce back for the Pistons. And it was a bummer because you could have gotten to 500 tonight. That would have been a nice step in the right direction. Nobody would have had this Pistons team at 8-8 in the first 16 games of the season. I know we're not into moral victories, and 500 certainly isn't the standard, but it would have been something tangible to hang your hat on with a chance to get above 500 against the Hornets. But the fight continues, and the Detroit Pistons certainly, I think it's, in a way, and I don't want to completely contradict myself, so don't take it as this, but it's almost refreshing to be this upset or distraught after after a loss like this, as opposed to apathetic. Oh yeah, we lost again. And I think that shows the changing of just the overall mindset, the changing of the abilities, the changing of the capabilities of this team. So we'll continue breaking it down. We'll talk more about that subpar defense throughout this contest, and then close it out with our studs and duds, your comments as well. Thanks so much for making the Locked On Pistons postcast part of your post-game destination. We take your comments next on the Locked On Pistons postcast. This episode of the Locked On Pistons postcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Listen up, BetterHelp. It's time to make some time for yourself. We are all about showing gratitude this time of year. Thanksgiving is a tremendous time to show gratitude. But how about some gratitude for somebody else that doesn't always get the attention they deserve? And that is, of course, yourself. Listen, it is helpful to make time for yourself. This month, it's all about the gratitude. And along with the person that you think of brings you the most gratitude, don't forget there's another person that doesn't get thanked enough. That's ourselves. Sometimes it's hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world. And that isn't easy. So here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, and that includes yourself. Listen, if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, I talked a little bit about the defense or lack thereof from the Pistons tonight, and I think that is just the best way to describe this game, because even when the Pistons cut it to 2 here and there, or they cut it to 4, then they give up 10 points in 3 minutes because of the Bulls' ability to just outshoot the defense. And as an adjustment moving forward, anytime you have bigs that in today's NBA, that's what it's all about. We all know that. Anytime you have the ability as a big to step away from the basket and knock down triples, that's going to be a matchup problem for this Pistons team. And I think the identity of this team, like I mentioned in the open, centers around gritty, tough defense. And JB Bickerstaff is speaking that into existence and doing his absolute best with that. But it takes some give and it takes some return from the players on the floor that are doing that. I mean, you can't have guys just going off and shooting at will and knocking down 23 3-pointers. You're just not going to win many games when that's the case. Offensively for the Pistons, good to see Tim Hardaway Jr. back in the lineup. I know he only had 2 points. Obviously, going 0 for 8 from the 3-point line, there's going to be some rust given the combination of not playing for several games, plus with the nasty injury and the nasty collision that he took. So hopefully this was just a one-game funk. He gets his legs underneath, and he's back and better than ever. Now, I've picked on Jalen Duren, and some of that is just his inability to defend the pick and roll. But offensively, you know, the contributions are there, 7 of 13 from the floor, and he grabbed 22 rebounds with 12 of them being offensive. So despite being -7 for the game, Duren did some good things, not to, again, go back and forth and try to contradict myself. But I think to be fair, you got to mention what he brought to the table despite being a liability defensively. And Isaiah Stewart, also liability defensively, but just not a lot there aside from the 26 from Cade Cunningham, who was 8 of 17 from the floor, 4 of 7 from 3-point land with 10 assists as well. 6 rebounds for Cade, but it was a night you just felt like you're playing catch up the entire time. And even when you would get it close, Pistons couldn't get over that hump to ultimately try to earn the victory. And that's why they fall to 7-9 on the season, and the Bulls move to 6-9 on the year, 5-4 away from home. The Pistons 3-5 at home. Also, I guess to be fair, I want to mention, in addition to the bad interior defense, there's a couple of times where Tobias Harris just got blown off the dribble by Patrick Williams. And it's not like Patrick Williams had this great game by any means. In fact, he was just 3 of 10 from the floor for 8 points. But a couple of times he just dribbled past Tobias Harris. And again, I'm not asking these guys to be, you know, the greatest defensive stopper, like I guess Gary Payton comes to mind, you know, the all on-ball defenders, all world, but collectively as a team, they have to play better defense. And I know 122 is not some, you know, enormous amount of points, but when your comprised offensively the way the Pistons are with their shortcomings, it's going to be tough to win games when the opposition shoots 50% from three-point land and makes 23 three-pointers and ultimately scores 122 points. So that's my 2 cents. Some would say worth less than that. But hey, it's a live Locked On Pistons postcast. As a reminder, this is your Locked On postgame show. It all happens on Locked On Sports Detroit. So if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe, and then the audio coincides with the corresponding show. So the Locked On Pistons postcast, you can find the audio on the Locked On Pistons podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, free and available on YouTube as well. We'll have our studs and duds portion of the program and close it out on this Locked On Pistons postcast after Detroit falls to the Chicago Bulls 122-112 from Little Caesars Arena. Your comments and, of course, our studs and duds are coming up next on the live Locked On Pistons postcast. This episode of the Locked On Pistons postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. That's right. Now is the time. There is no better time to get involved with America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel, because right now, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you got to act on it. You got to make it happen, and FanDuel is where it all goes down. So get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and the NBA all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Closing out your live Locked On Pistons postcast with some studs and duds after a disappointing 122-112 loss. Detroit's next game Thursday against the Hornets, and you'd like to think this Pistons team could possibly avenge that last second loss from last game, or the last time they played the Hornets in Charlotte, 108-107, where Detroit just decided not to box out at the end of the game. So hopefully that's not a sign of things to come in the future here. But Pistons fall to the Chicago Bulls 122-112, and the Bulls find a way to shoot 50% from the three-point line. For the Pistons, rather, 15 of 44, just 34% from the three-point line, 42.9% from the floor overall, 43% we'll call it, 42 of 98. Some other areas, the Pistons actually took care of the ball relatively good in this game. They didn't turn it over a whole great deal. In fact, just 9 turnovers compared to the Bulls' 11. So you like that component of the game. That's always something that you can get a feel for the way this team played. But the defense and the inability to close out on shooters allows the Bulls to shoot 48% from the floor, 50% from three, and the rest is history. Or that's a wrap, as they say. So some studs and duds. We'll start with the studs, and you got to give a lot of credit to the Chicago Bulls team, as much as it pains me. But Vucevic led the way with 29 points. He was really good. And like I said, he got started early. He could not be stopped. That allowed him to get into the rhythm. The Pistons didn't have any answers for him who could guard him. And when that happens, the rest of the team feeds off of it. And the confidence was then passed on to Zach LaVine in that fourth quarter, who goes for 16 fourth quarter points, 25 for the game. He was plus 24, as was Vucevic. So when they were on the floor, they were really dominating this Detroit Pistons team. And then the third trio, the Kobe White scoring 25 points and shooting 5 of 10 from 3, 9 of 14 from the floor. He's really coming into his own. But for the Bulls, again, I mentioned the 2 previous losses. They use this as a get-right game. And unfortunately, the Pistons are the victim of that, or on the other side that you don't want to be on. But you got to call it what it is, and even as disappointing as that may be. Now, for the duds of the evening, I keep picking on them, but man, the inability to stop the Bulls from the defensive side of things with the pick and roll defense, with the inability to close out on shooters, the really just not the opposite of making it tough on your opposition. The opposite of playing good defense was what we saw from the Pistons today. And that collectively, the team defense gets a dud from me. And again, if you're looking for specifics on who really struggled defensively, I thought Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, those two, because the Bulls bigs got away with whatever they wanted to do. And that part, and not to put any other blame on anyone else, but JB tried switching, and then he tried, staying with guys, whatever it may be, whatever the Pistons were trying wasn't working. And even if you let Duren sit in the paint at times like they did, that wasn't working. And so the matchup nightmare that this game continued to be for the Pistons is really what stood out for me. So something's got to change. Hopefully it changes sooner rather than later, because I do think this team is worth a whole heck of a lot more than last year's team. I mean, my goodness, that's pointing out the obvious. Even as I said that, as it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, well, no duh, Jake. No bleepity bleep beep bleep. But in all seriousness, to think this team very well and probably should be at 500 or maybe even above 500, 16 games in the season is light years ahead of where they were last year. But again, it's not the standard. So learn from this one, as Greg Kessler said on the post game. Use it as fuel, use it as motivation, all that good stuff, and come back stronger against the Charlotte Hornets on Thursday. We'll have a Locked On Pistons postcast for you then. And then, of course, after the Pistons then take on the Hornets on Thursday, Detroit will take on the Orlando Magic. So a little 2-game road trip there. They're in Charlotte, in Orlando, before coming home a week from today to take on the Raptors, a team they recently beat 99-95 in an ugly game. But hey, a win is a win. So that'll do it for me. Don't forget, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Pistons daily newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pistons newsletter. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And as always, again, just to reiterate, this is Locked On Pistons Postcast, the post-game show brought to you by Locked On Sports Detroit, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Appreciate it if you would subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at Jake_Rietma, and appreciate all of the support. We had the Locked On Lions postcast yesterday, so if you want to check that out as well, you know where to find it. It's on Locked On Sports Detroit. So thank you one, thank you all. Pistons fall to the Chicago Bulls. Final score 122-112. Try to earn a dub the next time out, which will be on Thursday. Until then, the Pistons are 7-9, 3-5 at home. We'll talk to you next time on the Locked On Pistons postcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.